So I have here a pair of FRS radios branded by GE. Branded GE, made by Thompson, I believe. One of which works perfectly. This one here works absolutely perfectly. There's nothing wrong with it. This is, I mean, you could see that this is the one that wasn't used very much. Like maybe this was the parent's one and this was the child's one. This one was beat up a bit. And this one, it receives just fine. It does actually transmit. It will call the other FRS radio, and there is some garbled audio coming out. Now, both of these had batteries that had done a fairly good number in the battery back. I was able to clean them up sufficiently. I've got batteries in it now, but I was able to, but I won't try to demonstrate. I was able to clean these up fairly well, but not perfectly. But I have a hypothesis as that the problem with this is, these are not waterproof in any way, is that water or something from the battery goop, as you can see, you know, this is, it's got continuity, but it's not great. But, you know, that's the best I could do with that anyway. That something got into the microphone. So I was thinking that maybe I could take the microphone out of this old home phone. That actually used to be my home phone when I had one. That I might try stealing the microphone out of there and see if it'll fit in there. Really, anything else on this is not really worth playing around with. But it would be nice to have a working set of two so that, you know, my daughter can play with them around our little area, play with them in the park, whatnot. I wouldn't consider that the range on these, especially in the city, would be good enough to be of any significant use. Might be okay at a campground, but I mean, you know, you could get a pair of FRS radios for $25 on sale, or you know, 50, you could get something fairly good. So it's not worth putting a lot of effort into these. But, you know, over the course, by the time I'm likely to be camping next summer, it's quite likely I'll find another pair of FRS radios around one of the thrift shops. And, you know, maybe I'll luck out and get another one that works. That's the nice thing about an interoperable standard. So what I'm going to do is have a look at the microphone in here, and then have a look at the microphone in here, and assuming they seem similar, and I don't know what to do apart from soldering it in and see if it works. So that's the plan. The soldering iron is warming up. I don't think I'll take a whole lot of video of this, but I'll take some spots here and there and show you what I see inside these two things. So first we'll open up the FRS radio, this little GE radio. So just to illustrate what we're dealing with on the inside here, this is the microphone, which is glued in with some sort of goopy glue there. I was worried about this capacitor, which looks like but that looks like it's the same goopy glue that's on there. So I think that might have been, yeah, it's definitely glue. But you can see how corrosion from the batteries has damaged the lead here. I mean, it's still conducting, it's still soldered, but you can see, you know, the white corrosion around there, even though I've made some attempt to clean up a little bit on here. So that's here, this is right next to it. So I'm thinking that microphone might be a problem. So I'm going to make some attempt to desolder that and then scrape it off. But yeah, I don't know how easy that's going to be to get out. There's a lot of glue and crap around there. Yep. We'll see what we can do. And I'll definitely need to take a still image of this so that I can see how the leads were put together. However, before I get too carried away and trying to desolder stuff, let's have a look at this phone. This came apart very easily. 2 screws and, a few clips around the edge with a magic soft plastic tool. And so here's the question. Where's the microphone? There's the microphone. It's smaller and it's mounted to the board. So I think before I fight with this, I want to have a look at how easy that's going to be to desolder. So I think I need to get the board out of the phone, have a look at that, and then see where it takes me. I've got to say I don't mind destroying the phone at all. It's like I'll never use these again, and there's still like 2 handsets to go with the base station, so there's not a whole lot of loss if you need it for something. So I've got to say I've always wanted to have a look into one of these phones, so in that sense. Let's move this light around a little bit. Oh, crashed into my monitor. I'll try it like that for now. And it's interesting, so that I think is probably the display driver for the reason that it's on the back of the display. There's the speaker. That comes out. We got 2 blobs. One with a number on it. No, there's a crystal. That's not surprising given there's a radio. There's a crystal in here too, right? There's the crystal. There's a chip. But it does show you that the difference between, say, the mid, like 2010 or so for these things, and the late 90s, certainly simplified. Obviously different kinds of radios, much lower output from this, right? These are, what are they, 1.4 gigahertz that these things operate on? I can't remember. Anyhow, and the speaker for the hands-free mode, and probably the ringer, I think, on the back. There's the programming interface, display, and there's the microphone. So let's see, what do the leads look like on the back? It looks like those could be desoldered easily enough. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Yeah, that looks, it's these 2 leads. These 2 leads here, I believe. I don't think it should be too hard to get those out. What's interesting is that this is all these surface wave components have been mechanically soldered, but you can see the little bit of flux around this capacitor, and also around these leads here. So those have been hand soldered on after the board was populated, which is interesting. Let's see. Where's the antenna? Presumably one of these traces on the board. Was that the antenna there? That little semicircular thing? I don't know. It might be on the other side. I kind of assumed that there would just be some traces on the board that functioned as the antenna for these things. Well, anyway, it's beyond my pay grade when it comes to electronics. So, yeah, I think I'm going to see if I can desolder this little microphone. So one thing I noticed as I look at this little microphone here is that there's a little plus on the board right there. And I did note that the wires for the mic on the FRS radio are also polarized, and that they're black and red, as one would expect. So I'm going to mark the outside of this big Clive coming through, but I'm going to mark this side of this case with red so that I know that that's the positive side, because I don't know whether the component will be marked underneath it all. There isn't anything obvious on the other microphone. So that's as much as this iPhone camera will zoom in. There's the camera. There's the microphone out of the phone, and there are no markings obviously on it to me, but it seems to be out. I hope I didn't overheat it too badly getting it out. As always, it looks like it should be easy, but it's always a little harder to get these things out than you think. But I do have, my red marker, so we'll continue with that. So now the question is, how do we get that one out? That's going to be a bit harder, I suspect. Okay, so I desoldered the leads off of here, and I think my approach to getting this off is going to be twofold. First, I'm going to, off camera, to limit the amount of blood people have to see, attempt to sort of cut away the glue that's around the edge. It looks like the microphone is in a sort of plastic or rubber carrier, and I'm kind of hopeful that I'll be able to slide the knife around there. Once I've done that, I'm going to apply brute force with a small screwdriver and see how that works. I'm fairly hopeful. I think I'll be able to get it out without damaging too much of anything. Well, that actually went extremely easily, and here we have the microphone that I've taken out. Oddly enough, there is the microphone hole doesn't line up perfectly, as you can see, with the perforation in the rubber sort of sleeve that the microphone is sitting in. I think that is actually an attempt to keep moisture out of the microphone, at least a little bit, to give it a little bit of splash resistance. So that ended up being a fairly difficult thing to do, but it's done. Let's twist these wires, because my guess is the twist helps a little bit. And so I've got the rubber thing back in place. I think what I'm going to do, well, that's off, is hot glue this in place here. And of course I'm going to have to resolder this battery connector too. So I think I'm going to do those two things and then put it back together, and then I'll try it out and see if I've got any improvement. I mean, this is a fairly low likelihood of success kind of repair, but why not? What turned out to be really difficult was resoldering this here. Now I've just soldered it with some of my hookup wire, which is unfortunately solid core, which isn't ideal. This is what was there, but it's got to be aluminum or something, because it doesn't take solder at all. I turned up the iron really hot and dumped flux on it, and nothing. But as soon as I use this wire, bang, bang, it comes right in. So I don't know. This soldered just fine. So that's normal wire. All right. So now we're going to heat up the glue gun and see if we can glue this back in here in a way that will work. Like that, I think, with the leads down there. I have to dodge this screw. Okay, so there it is, glued in place after a fashion, hopefully well enough. Now I'm going to try to get this closed, and then I'll test it out. So much to my shock, my repair works. The this radio does in fact now broadcast effectively to this one. This mic is stronger than that one. It might be because of the larger capsule in the original. It may be because I don't have the other one gooped in quite the right position. There could be lots of reasons for that. But I'm fairly pleased with how this came out. Now, a couple of thoughts about why I chose to replace the microphone. The page button always worked just fine and seemed to have decent range. So that meant that the transmitter was working. Now my knowledge of how transmitters worked is pretty superficial, but it strikes me that if it's managing to send whatever tone the page does, I mean, presumably that's just an FM tone, it's an FM radio, right? So that suggests that there's nothing wrong with the transmitter, right? I mean, there are parts of the transmitter which I don't quite understand, but there's nothing wrong with the transmitter, and even if there is, that's not something that I can repair in any event, right? I mean, these are not really designed to be repairable, and it may violate, we're in Canada, CRTC regulations to try to muck around with it. But I could make a couple of observations. First was the battery damage. The second was this one was much more beat up. And you can see looking at the displays, this one actually had the plastic on the display still. This one was more beat up than that one. And my noting that they're not very waterproof, right, in terms of how they're designed. So putting all those things together, I thought, well, what's in the signal path? Probably one chip is doing everything. There's the amplifier, is the decoder, maybe even the transmitter. I mean, there's not much on them. They're like 3 chips and a crystal and some passive electronics. There's not much in there. So it's really hard to imagine what could go wrong. There were capacitors, but there are not a lot of electrolytics in it, and not a lot that seemed like something that would help, I guess, is one way of putting it. So that then left the start of the signal path, which was the microphone, which I could replace, and could replace for free because I've got these phones around. So then it's like, okay, maybe we'll try that and see how that works. And it does. So I'm, as I said, very pleased with this fix as a fashion. I think they're fine for a kid playing around. I wouldn't rely on them for anything, but who's going to rely on FRS radios, especially of this era, for anything but playing around? So I think my $5.99 or whatever they were at the store was well worth it, and this was a fun project. And I will certainly keep an eye out for more FRS or radios, because I suspect that they show up fairly often. I will add one thing. Being in downtown Toronto, there is a major construction site with across through the back wall, essentially, straight ahead from where I'm sitting right now. And when I was playing around with these, I found that I could listen to the guys who were, guiding the trucks in and out of the construction site on Channel 1 on these radios. And that was pretty entertaining, I've got to say, because they were spouting a lot of BS. It was pretty good. I will have to try that again. So that's another small repair project that I think was reasonably successful. And, I think, as you look at these videos, you're watching me as a rank amateur start to improve his skills at trying to troubleshoot, small, low voltage electronics. And there are a few things I know about. I can replace capacitors and that sort of thing. But I think my troubleshooting skills are improving a little bit, and this I think is a pretty big win, and I'm fairly pleased with myself for that.